Welcome to the Charity Changemakers podcast, your weekly dose of inspiration and action for the changemakers of the world. Each week, we dive deep into the world of impactful charities. We connect you with the passionate leaders, the innovative ideas, and the real-world stories that are making a difference. Whether you're a seasoned non-profit professional or just starting out, this podcast is your chance to learn from the best and get fired up to make a positive change. We'll explore the challenges and triumphs of running a successful charity. We'll hear about the fundraising strategies, impactful programs, and the stories of the people whose lives are being transformed. But most importantly, we'll leave you feeling empowered and equipped to take action in your community and the organisations in which you work. So, buckle up, changemakers, because we're about to embark on a journey of inspiration and impact.
You're in for an absolute treat today on the Charity Changemakers podcast, as I'm joined by Beth Crackles, who's the Chief Executive of the Sheffield Hospitals Charity. From growing up within an equestrian centre to now being the Chief Executive, Beth's career has gone through a variety of different roles within the sector, and really interesting and inspiring conversation that we share in. You're going to learn huge amounts here and be really inspired by her story and by her journey. I think there's some really important key things to listen out for within the conversation: the importance of learning from others, the importance of increasing your knowledge and going through qualifications and training, but also about instilling a positive working culture within an organisation. So with no more listening to me going on, it's time to go and to meet our Changemaker. Delighted to be joined by Beth today. Thank you so much for joining us on the Charity Changemakers podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Pleasure.
lovely. And all well today?
Yeah, very good, very good. Just after the bank holiday weekend, isn't it? So I think we've all come back to work thinking, what is our job?
Yes, that's right, indeed. Yes, yeah, it's always difficult. You've got to cram a 5-day week into 4. So,
Exactly.
yes, yeah, absolutely. Look, with all of with the podcast, what we like to do is sort of kick off with our quickfire questions. A bit of an opportunity for listeners, the audience, to get to know you a little bit. So tell me, Beth, what's the most interesting place you've ever visited?
Do you know what? I'm going to go with something. I imagine your other guests are going to come with like really exotic places or something like somewhere incredible that they've visited as part of like an amazing gap year and they've been really enlightened or something. I'm going to go with London.
Yes.
So I think it's because I guess sort of like growing up in a field in North Yorkshire is the summary of my childhood. And I ended up after uni going and living in London, and it was that first like proper feeling of being completely independent, earning my own money, albeit very, very small amount of money in central London, but like exploring different places and the sense of being completely anonymous in a massive city and then making that city home.
That's great. And I think we'll probably talk a little bit about London when we delve a little bit into your journey into the charity sector as we go. Second quick fire question for you then. What are you reading at the moment?
Right. This it's a little bit deep, this one, and I want to preface it by saying that I have just also read Britney Spears' autobiography.
Yes.
But what I'm going with is, I've brought it with me, it's Mad, Bad and Sad by Lisa Apignanisi, and it's the history of women and the mind doctors from 1800 to the present, which makes me sound way more intellectual than I ever am. This is not usual reading matter for me, but it's basically about mental health and mind doctors, I guess, over the centuries. And I've only just started it, but it's really interesting, particularly the stuff around the expression of different cultures and how that plays out in terms of mental health.
Very impressed. Yes, yeah. That's great. And final quickfire one. So away from work, away from all the pressures, everything that you've got in your day-to-day working life, what do you do to relax?
I do go for a run to clear my head, but that's more of a like to make sure I don't murder anybody around me. Have to clear my head, go for a nice run. I do like a book just to lose myself in it, but I think really it's about I go for noodles with a friend quite often, my friend Vanessa, and it's just loads of fun and it's silly and I get to drink wine and have noodles. So I think one of the things that COVID and lockdown really highlighted for me was like a massive need to be near people. and around different people all the time. So social stuff.
Yeah. Perfect. No, that's great. Good. Beth, obviously, you're Chief Executive of Sheffield Hospitals Charities. Now, of course, when you're working in the charity sector, you don't just necessarily rock up as Chief Executive. There's a whole journey to get there. And I'm still to speak to anybody who, very consciously started out their career with that aim of, working in either fundraising or within the charity sector, and really interested in people's journeys into the charity sector, and thinking about those that are listening that are either, aspiring to get into the sector or aspiring to take that next step to director or chief executive in their careers. It's been really interesting to hear so far on people's journey into the sector. So I'd love to tell us a little bit about what that journey looked like for you.
Crikey, that's a big question.
Yes. We'll go to the beginning. Yes.
I'll begin with that.
Yeah.
So do you want me to go right?
Yeah, let's go. Yeah, let's go right back. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, I guess that over the past few years, I've realised that this sounds so silly. Your childhood is so incredibly formative. It's such an obvious thing to say, but I think stuff about that has really come out for me over the past few years in various different ways. And I guess, if I sort of go back to sort of growing up, so I'm the youngest of four, and my brother is the eldest and was born very poorly and missed a lot of school. And at the time, my mum and my sister and my brother and their father lived in the northeast and were basically farmers in the northeast. And so my brother was very poorly. Sadly, not my dad, my brother and sister's father had a lot of mental health challenges and died by suicide.
Right.
And so my mum's like this incredible, belligerent, frustrating woman, and sort of nurtured what my brother had and was able to do. And basically, they all spent, as I did, ultimately more time with animals than humans for the first part of our lives. And so she really nurtured that with my brother, and he turned out to be quite good with ponies and went on to do some qualifications around like teaching people to ride, basically.
Yes.
So we went from having my brother doing some riding lessons in a field at the back of the house by the time I was born, and then we moved to this piece of land, and essentially over a number of years my mother developed it into a full equestrian centre, which so, I mean, it just sounds bonkers when you try and explain this to somebody, because typically, well, there are two types of people, right? There are people who have money and so they have horses, and then there are people who don't have money because they have horses, and we're very much the latter. So, but in terms of like how formative that stuff was for me, I guess, I mean, there is something about suicide, and I wasn't born until like 13 years after, but it is something that obviously stays with people and does shape a family dynamic. My brother being poorly and this sort of bizarre thing of my mum doing all of this without any financial backing, there is that kind of a colleague actually described my character as benign belligerence once, and I was like, I think that's a compliment. There's something about being determined to do stuff. So I mean, basically, I guess the things that I took from it were like a sort of work ethic. Which, if you're working with animals, is like 24/7. And both of my parents had their own businesses, which they'd started from scratch. So, seeing that, it's like, well, that's what work looks like.
That's how you do it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And does that work in, running an equestrian centre? You have to excuse my ignorance, but then I guess that interaction with people coming on site and members of the public, and that customer service type approach to work, but also seeing people, different people from the community as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it was. I mean, we were basically like horse dealers.
Yes, right. Okay.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
So we were like horse dealers in the 90s, yeah, basically. But we also did riding for the disabled, so
Right.
local Riding for the Disabled Association Centre. So, you know, from a very young age, I was seeing people who were who had physical disabilities, learning difficulties, right through to people buying horses for fun.
Because I guess, like you say, you know, growing up in a question centre, you know, seeing that, you know, work ethic of your family that's being obviously instilled in you, that grit, that determination that that you talk about as well, you know, through your career, going to run, working in a question show jumping yard. Where did that first opportunity in the charity sector come from, or what kind of sparked that change of direction?
So I guess there were a couple of changes of directions. One was going to university. So I quit my A-levels. I did some MVQs, which were quite straightforward because I've been doing the practical stuff since I was able to walk.
Sure.
And I was working on the show jumping yard, and all my friends were going off to university, and I thought, if I break my back, which is a possibility, I have nothing to fall back on, and I've never felt particularly academic because I messed about at school because put loads of teenagers together. What? That's great fun, right? So so I sort of underperformed, got what I needed, but massively underperformed, and so I sort of talked my way on to an HND and then topped up to degree, equine science, completely useless unless you want to be like a physiotherapist or something, which I considered for a bit. I'm also not very good at science, so there was a bit of a problem, on that side. Anyway, when I graduated, my mum actually moved abroad. So I was like, I've got this really relevant degree to running the business, but it's not there anymore. And so I sort of needed to make a call on where I was going to go and live and what I was going to do. I met all these people and who were moving to London, and I was like, well, I've got nowhere to live.
Yeah.
So I'll go live in London, sleep on my sister's couch for a bit until I got a job. So I just walked into the first job that I could get.
Yeah.
Which was for a media company.
Right.
Office junior. Never been in an office before.
Yeah.
Not even been inside for that long during a day. And I just sort of worked my arse off really, and moved up to be PA, which was really challenging, a very challenging person to work for, but from whom I learned a lot. Yeah. And from there moved into a PA role at RNIB.
Right.
Just massive sight loss charity based by King's Cross. And I mean, my version of events is basically sort of did the same, worked hard, took the opportunities.
So that PA, that move there and that, and I think that's what we see is that I guess that determination from, instilled in you through childhood into that, moving to London, massive city, completely, different to where you've been before, and working hard and getting that opportunity and getting that first opportunity in the charity sector. And that was as a PA was the first role in the sector, was it?
Yeah, I really struggled to get a job from moving from that media company, and I think partly that was because I was in a junior role and I was on 2 or 3 months notice. Nobody wants to wait that long for somebody who can, when everybody else can start the next day kind of thing. And I wasn't even that, I didn't want to be a PA.
Yes.
I was a really bad PA, which Paul Marder will agree with. And probably Joe as well. But I moved over as a PA, and then I took on lots of other things. I basically worked much beyond my job description, not in a oh God, they exploited me, not at all. But I was looking for ways to, I think at the time I was wanting to work in marketing and events, because when you're in your early 20s, you think that that's really cool, and then you actually get to do it and you're like, oh my God, it's so stressful. It's so stressful working in events. So thankfully I didn't quite make it into events. But I did do, I think I mentioned in our pre-call, I kind of owed Joe Jenkins, who was head of strategy at RNIB, a fair bit for sort of, I don't know, spotting something in me.
Yeah.
And Joe gave me loads of other stuff to do, like writing reports about the database. I got involved with business planning and sort of monthly and quarterly reporting around business plans. I was involved with setting up the innovation team, so I got to work with Management Centre on developing the innovation framework and stuff. And this was at a time when other charities were starting to set up an innovation team. So I remember Cancer Research had done it, and we were like, oh my God, look at Cancer Research, an innovation team, like what do they do, kind of thing. So it was really like at the beginning of all that. And so I did a secondment for a day a week, which Joe supported me to be able to do that, and then moved into a fundraising strategy planner role.
Right.
So I've come about my career in some ways in a kind of backwards about way, because I've not done the fundraising assistant, move into an officer role, become operationally brilliant in one area, and then end up managing a team and then having to do strategy and planning and budgeting. I've come from very broad, basically managing the business planning for RNIB's fundraising group, new product development, innovation, incremental improvements, and then going into a more sort of frontline role.
Yes, yeah. But I think what we see in there, isn't it, is an organisation and obviously an individual in Joe that's seen that potential in you. You know, someone who's come and performed well in a role. I mean, you might say that you're a bad PA, but clearly, performed well. You know, got that approach and attitude. That wants to learn, wants to find ways to deliver and to work hard, and then has invested in you. That's then you say set the platform for your career within the sector.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something brilliant. I mean, small charities are fabulous, and you learn so much because you have to do everything. And I've worked with lots of small organisations through consultancy work and training. Yeah. But there was something fantastic for me for being at RNIB in 2008-ish. It was a pretty wealthy organisation, so a large organisation, financial crash, but it had the wherewithal to be able to withstand that and also invest a little bit as well. So we did a big brand campaign, and I was like the liaison between fundraising and marketing. In a sort of officer level kind of role. I wasn't senior by any means, but I was sort of like coordinating stuff between. And there was somebody came into the marketing and comms department to manage that campaign called Sue. I think she might have been called Sue Martin. And she'd come from the commercial sector. She was basically like ex-Unilever. Yeah. And again, just like shut up and listen and watch these people do stuff and get involved, because, I learned a huge amount. I did my communications, advertising and marketing diploma at night at the same time as this was happening. So learning about the theory at night and then going in and watching these people develop a brand campaign, do the audience insight. It's really, really important stuff, and it's not stuff that I've had the opportunity to do again, because there's never necessarily been the money or the time to be able to do that from scratch. But I do reflect on that and draw on all of that learning. So big charities, super, super helpful. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, part of that investment that comes from those big charities, that they can see, the number of people they invest in, and they give that first opportunity in the sector, maybe entry level roles, and the places that people have gone on in their careers is just incredible to see. And I know we're constantly talking to people about opportunities to work with graduates, people entry level roles, and invest in them if they've got that. I guess that aptitude, that approach, that passion for the cause. Who knows where they may end up, either within that organisation or within their careers. But there's a couple of things in there that you mentioned. I mean, clearly that being a sponge and learning from others, really important. But you also mentioned there about sort of doing a diploma in the evening. So, and earlier in the conversation, you said I'm not very academic. So I'm intrigued by that approach to learning. I guess what inspired or had that within you to go and want to learn more and to do get qualifications?
I guess there's something about me that if I'm doing something, I want to do it well,
Yeah.
and I want to understand it. And I guess I am actually very theoretical, so which is really frustrating for some people, because I'm like, no, I need to understand more about that situation so I can see the whole picture, and then I can get to that point over here. If you just tell me the point, I don't get it. I need to understand how it sits within the broader context. And so, I guess I was like, right, I want to work in marketing or events. I'm going to do a marketing diploma. I can get onto that. That's fine. And then I did that, and that went really well. And I just seemed to get the marketing fundraising side of things. And so I did it. I did an evening course at some London School of Marketing or something, and I loved it. And then when I realised I wanted to stay in the charity sector, I was like, right, so what's the thing that I can do here? And I didn't want to do something that was the same kind of level. And I've also got to the point of thinking, actually, I'm maybe a little bit brighter or a bit more academic than I thought. And maybe I shouldn't just get hung up on, really struggling to get a C in GCSE maths. Maybe I should focus on the things that I'm good at.
Yeah.
And so I really had to work hard and convince Cass Business School, which is now Bayes, that a degree in equine science was legitimate.
Sure.
And they should definitely accept me onto a master's. They did. And I worked my arse off. I went to every lecture. I read all of the journals and the reports. I didn't just read the abstract at the front.
Sure.
I did. I was at Friends of the Earth at the time, and I was working compressed hours. So I was doing 5 days in 4, and then I was using the Friday, and I'd go and sit in the British Library.
Yes.
Near King's Cross, because they used to have this amazing cafe, Payton and Burn Cafe.
Yeah.
It's not there anymore. And you could get a pie, and you could basically have a proper good tuck-in, and I could sit there all day and do my reading and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I worked really hard on it, and I also went to every session at the pub as well, and I made a lot of people that I consider to be friends, also a professional network there.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those things where I'm like, oh my God, look at these incredible people. Eve has set up this incredible social enterprise. Jenny's doing this amazing thing over here. Alan's doing that thing over there. Oh my God, Ben's not even in the charity sector. What is he doing? I don't even understand. But it's, there's always somebody that you can call on or message or go, something's gone terribly wrong over here. Help me.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, because I think, quite often I hear people say, it can be quite lonely being a chief executive. And I guess if we fast forward to where you are now, but actually having that network of people or support, has that continued to be, really important network for you, people that you can call upon, or, pick up the phone to, or that kind of, that mentoring, that kind of peer-to-peer learning and support?
Yeah, for sure. There are people who I can go, I think I've done something a bit stupid. Can I sense check this with you?
Yeah.
There are people who I can go, this is really annoying, and just have a run at. More sort of structured stuff, I guess. So while I was doing my Masters, I cannot recommend this Masters highly enough, by the way, whether you're academic or not. It's so good. And as part of that, I shadowed Kath Abrahams, who's now Chief Exec at Tommy's, the baby loss charity.
Yeah.
And at the time, she was at Breakthrough Breast Cancer, which is Director of Engagement, Fundraising Engagement.
Yeah.
And I didn't shadow her for very long, but she's just one of the best people.
Yeah.
In every sense, basically. And so I shadowed her a little bit and stayed in touch. And when I moved into my first head of fundraising role at Toynbee Hall, which again, another organisation I absolutely adored, she had a place on, fancy coaching development course, and she needed some guinea pigs, and I was like, yes, please.
Yes.
And it was just really transformational, being able to talk through stuff. And the coaching approach is all about getting you to come to your own conclusions, to ask questions to help people get to the right place themselves. And so it's something that I try to do as well, try to adopt a coaching approach.
Yeah.
Although sometimes you've just got to go, just stop doing that.
Yeah, sure.
Cease and desist.
Yes.
Have you thought about maybe trying it this way?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's because I'm not Kath. But yeah, she's been amazing, and so she's given me a bit of support more recently as well as I've stepped into this role.
And I love that about the sector. I think, the sector where that, like I say, build that network, learning from one another, but also there to support, which might be, very different causes to the ones that you're working in, but the same challenges and that you face as go through. So I think it's, one of those golden threads that we're seeing through, what you share with us. I mean, clearly, the hard work, the determination, consistently, but also taking the opportunities as they arise. And come before you. So we've been on this journey, which has resulted obviously now as you as chief executive of Sheffield Hospital Charity. So I'd love to know how that came about. I know you've mentioned before about Sheffield Hospitals Charity being a charity that was very much on your radar.
So I did lots of freelancing, lots of consultancy and training during COVID as well for NCVO, who I'd worked for, doing a mat cover on some funding consultancy work, which again, incredible organisations, not without its challenges, but on balance was fantastic for me. So I've been keeping my eyes out for stuff in Sheffield, and there are a few high-profile charities in the city. Sheffield Hospitals Charity not really being one of them, if I'm honest. But I was like, so it's the majority of the NHS in the city, doesn't look to be brilliant, doesn't seem to have a great profile. Obviously I did a little snoop around on the Charity Commission accounts and stuff.
Yeah.
And I applied for a job actually when I was very pregnant and didn't get it. But the chief executive at the time stayed in touch with him, David Reynolds, lovely, lovely, lovely man. And I ended up meeting up with him for a coffee because I said, I see your director of income, the job that I'd gone for, has left. So have my baby now, can I please come and work for you? And he said, well, actually, I'm leaving. They're not replacing that role. They want a chief executive fundraising experience. And I was like, well... And he said, well, you should go for it. And I was like, don't be ridiculous. I can't be the chief exec. And he was like, no, you should definitely go for it. So I went for it, and I didn't get it.
Oh, right.
I was gutted. I interviewed so badly. I was really nervous. I just interviewed really badly. So to be fair, I wouldn't have employed me based on that interview either. But I have obviously kept an eye on it and been like, still not quite there, guys. Yeah. So when the job came up again, Adrian, the chair, called me and said, obviously doing an open and transparent recruitment process, but would you have a look? So I had a look, and then went for it, and it just feels completely right for me. Yes. And the organisation in terms of where it's at the moment. Yeah. So all of the difficult stuff that I love, I'm able to be like, I can get at that.
And what was the difference, do you think, between that first interview experience and then again through a second time?
I think, you can get into a whole load of conversation here about like imposter syndrome. Sure. I think I'd done a few more jobs. I've got more experience. I sort of knew my worth at that point. So when lovely David Reynolds supported me to go for it the first time, I was like, chief executive, it's a silly job title, I can't do that, and I'm not sure about that level of responsibility and all of that stuff. Whereas when I came into it next time, I was like, I'm a charity professional. I know what I am doing. I am very clear about how this organisation can develop. I'm clear about how I could lead as me, how I would manage people as me, the different relationships that we need to have as an organisation, the way the organisation, I think, needs to reposition itself. Yeah. So kind of like, if you don't want me, that's fine, but here's what I would bring. Yeah. Which is a completely different mindset to being like, oh my God, I really hope I don't mess up my interview. It's kind of like, take it or leave it. Which is a very different place to be. Yeah. And I know that sounds like really cocky now, but I do struggle with I do feel like I'm about 12 years old a lot of the time. And then I'll be in a meeting and I'll be like, okay, I know what needs to happen here. So let's try and help the conversation around that way. But I think generally being like quite informal in my nature and quite like silly in some respect. Like I like silliness. My little girl asked me the other day, she was like, what's your favourite thing to do? Like, what's your hobby? And I was like, oh God, well, it's depressing. I don't think I have a hobby. But I was just like, I think it's silliness. I think I really like silliness. So, but I think that's sometimes misinterpreted as being like, let's just be daft, rather than I am incredibly focused and driven. But I just think you can do things and have a good time.
And have fun. And how do you so how does that approach, or how do you instill that within because you talk then about obviously coming into Sheffield Hospitals Charity and your vision for it for the future, and you talked about change and what it might need to go through, but also has that meant instilling a new culture into the organisation, and what does that look like for you and your character, who you are as an individual, and building that team?
So it's maybe helpful if I give you the context of what I came into. So on my first day, well, actually before my first day, so I'd had a couple of conversations with certain members of the team around, somebody's left so they need to recruit and things. And I was like, I don't want to block any recruitment, but let's just try and understand how this fits and is it the right role for now, sort of thing. So I was like, can you send me over the strategy, because I'm not seeing anything like that? And the director of finance at the time literally nearly wet himself laughing on this video call. So I was like, I have it's not there, is it? There's no strategy, there's no plan. The budget's a bit like new chief exec to review the budget. So I was like, okay. So I had a bit of a sense that things weren't all that brilliant, and I know that there'd been a fair bit of turnover. So I commissioned a staff survey before I started, and that highlighted a lot of problems culturally within the organisation. We scored really, really badly. So it's the Birdsong Consulting it, and it benchmarks you against the charity sector as well. That survey closed the day that I started, and so I came in being like, the first day I remember getting everybody together. This is a conversation that I had with Kath Abrahams, being like, I know what I want to do with the organisation. What do you do on day one? Nobody tells you what to do when you're chief exec. They're like, try and make you a nice cup of tea or something. And I'm just like, I don't know what to do. Literally, what do I go in and do? So, anyway, so I came in and I got everybody together and I was like, right, this is all about relationships. The relationships that we have with each other, the relationships that we have with the trust, the relationships that we have with supporters. The only way that we are going to have the edge as an organisation is to have the best relationships and give people the best experience, whatever that relationship is with us. And people sort of like looked at the table a little bit. And then I got the results of the staff survey back and I was like, oh, that's why they were looking at the table. Avoid all eye contact on that one. So morale was very low, lots of friction between teams. And it's because we have some actually really, really brilliant people who work here, but without a shared vision or objectives or anything other than raise money, give money out, but with very few parameters. They had their own objectives and they were conflicting objectives. So, and there was lots of disparity with pay and roles and stuff like that. Yeah. So I've gone from being like, right, just come in and listen and learn for 3 months, to being like, on day 2, okay, right, we'll stop working with that company because we shouldn't be anywhere near it. Kill that relationship. How about we have a look over here? And so lots of really fundamental changes and lots of stuff that are around culture as well. We had somebody commuting in from Leicester to Sheffield every day because she was in the first 6 months of the role and she'd been told that she couldn't work from home until she'd passed that probation period.
Yes, right.
And I was like, hey Liz, which days do you work from home? She's like, oh, I can't because X, Y, Z. And I was like, well, you're going to die, so work from home.
We're going to change that.
This is insane. Yeah. So lots of like immediate, just like let's be like normal
quick wins.
people.
Yeah. Those sort of quick wins that were there that you could, I guess, make some of that cultural change quite quickly. We're quite interested about, I guess, some of the challenges, opportunities that you faced, obviously since joining, the charity and what that's looked.
Hospitals Charity is the charity partner for Sheffield Teaching Hospitals and Sheffield Health and Social Care Trust. Yeah. And so between those two trusts, they employ over 21,000 NHS staff.
Yeah. So
when we compare that with other healthcare charities in the city, so we cover all of the adults basically. Yeah. The children's have around 3,000 staff. So in terms of the NHS remit, we're 7 times bigger. And the Children's Hospital Charity is a fantastic charity and it's well established and it's got a consistent brand. They've got a great team that they put on great events. They are so well known and they work that. They play that card and like fair play to them. We are different. We're just very different as an organisation just because we're the NHS and they are, but we are very, very different. So we need to be doing some stuff like the children's do, like the other big sort of charity players in the city do, in terms of profile events and things like that. But I'm really clear that we are very different actually. Yep. Our remit is broader for a start. It's bigger in terms of the volume of people that go through our trust. It's like 2 million people a year cared for. We have lots of specialisms. As I said, I'm rubbish at science, but and everything to do with medicine. But we have some really significant things that take place in Sheffield. So we're a regional major trauma centre, for example, at Northern General, where we're based at the moment. Yeah. We have CITRAN, which is the Sheffield Institute of Translational Neuroscience Research. There are so many incredible things. You could have a charity for each one of those things. There was actually, funny story, there was a charity actually called Neurocare that was a linked charity with Sheffield Hospitals Charity. And that's one of the early decisions recommendations, very strong recommendations that I took to the Board of Trustees in the first few months. So it was operating with a separate brand, with a sort of segregated supporter base, and funding neuro-related projects.
Yes.
And I was like, why?
Yeah.
Why would we have a separate charity for that and not for all the other billions of things that we fund?
That we could.
And also, this charity financially is in decline. And, did a support survey, a standard kind of response levels to that, looked at the income and expenditure over a number of years, etc. And it was like, it's in decline, it's not going to survive past November, which would have been this year. So I was like, let's just fully integrate it. It just means that we consolidate the money, we consolidate the database because we can actually speak to these people, and we do more, and it's more strategic. Because of the emotional connection with such a lot of what we do, wasn't the most popular decision in some parts. And I think that's where for me the whole well, sometimes it's lonely being a chief exec, because, you know, I can call on the professional network on my mates that I like, and they'll just say, yeah, well done, or they're idiots, or, you know, they'll say the things that make me happy that I want to hear, but it doesn't actually help when you're in a boardroom and people are like, I fundamentally disagree with your decision, Beth. Like, well, it's an objective one. Here's all the data. You know, this is what I recommend. So it's stuff like that where you've really got to hold your nerve. And also, I think for me, recognizing, you know, I said like I like a framework and stuff. Nothing really is black or white. You are always operating within the inevitable grey area of life. And within that, you can cut it in so many different ways, can't you? And so I guess that's where, for me, it's really helpful to be able to go, okay, well, there's a framework that I can think about in my mind that all of this stuff can hang off. But actually, based on the experience of working for a campaigning organisation over here or a tiny arts charity over here, how would this play out across these different stakeholders? Do you know what I mean? And therefore, this is why I think this is the best decision in this instance. Yes, there are other decisions that could be made, but this is the one that I think is right here.
And it sounds like even in those, you know, even in those difficult decisions, that it's quite a data that you quite like. That there is a scientific approach to a degree. You quite like that data behind the reasoning behind it, and that recognition of impact that it has on stakeholders, and taking all of that into account.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think, you know, when I do take on more significant things, I wouldn't do that if I wasn't 100% sure. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't challenge something or someone unless I was confident about that.
Yes. Yeah.
And to be able to be confident in that, you need to have a rounded view and acknowledge that, you know, there are different ways of doing things. This is just one way, and I think it's the best one.
Yeah. And that collaborative approach. I mean, going back to, you know, that staff survey that, you know, I've never heard of anybody doing a staff survey before they arrive on day one. But I guess, you know, the things that you pulled out in there, you know, what you talk about there around making decisions in a collaborative style and that working together, you know, your eyes down at the table in that first meeting. Yeah. How have you changed, you know, that approach and that culture in the organisation in the time that you've been there?
So I think, gosh, a number of things. There are so many little things that you can do, as well as the big things. So the big things are, we had a reorganisation, I refreshed the job descriptions, put in salary bands, transparent salary bands. Did things like, rather than just senior people being on the interview panels, bringing other people into the interview panels, putting in place an assistant and an apprentice role as well. So that we're a small team, and so there is a huge amount of movement, but the structure is intentional so that, you know, people could actually move up a little bit and stay with us within their careers, and investing in professional development. So, you know, as an SLT, we've been like, God, we really need to sit down and talk about training and development, but we haven't got the time to do that thoroughly, properly now. So what are the principles and where are we going to put the budget for now? Developing the strategy, again, as collaboratively as possible with the two trusts, based on the health of the population of Sheffield, based on the priorities of the trust, based on where we're at as an organisation as well. So, and the staff group being part of that, refreshing the vision and the mission and the values. So we've got 3 values now, rather than generic, like, I don't even know what they were, to be honest, but I bet they were, we are collaborative.
Sure.
Yes. We are innovative.
Sure, just real off what everybody's got on the website.
Yeah. So, you know, we've now got 3 and we're like, what does that mean for us? In terms of how we work with each other and other people, and how we think about our work. So there are all of those things that, if you read any management book, it'll tell you to do these things in a collaborative way. And then I think there were smaller things, which I have to say I get no feedback on these, but I think are important. So more of a link between the board and the staff group. So rather than just being the chief exec that goes to board, the SLT are now in on that as well.
Yes.
Having a little bit of time for people to come and have a cup of tea with trustees before or after board meeting.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work brilliantly because everybody's stretched for time in terms of trustees turning up at certain times and staff and whatever. But, the opportunity is there. The other thing was that we didn't have any space for people to have their lunch because it's not the sort of site where you would necessarily go and sit. We actually funded an incredible massive garden, but it's like the Northern General is over 100 acres, I think. So it's it takes
got to trek
a long
there.
time to get there. Yeah, you do the buggy carts and this. So I was like, well, we'll turn the chief exec office into just a room where people can go and sit and have lunch and stuff like that. Yeah. So I did like a bit of a changing rooms job on it on a weekend.
Sure.
And it's pretty disgusting because, I just had to use what I found in the basement and things. Yeah. But it is a space that people can go and sit in and have their lunch.
Yes.
We have another tiny little thing, but again, I think is important, is we have a sign-in board, a little whiteboard, and people put their name and the time that they get in.
Yeah.
And like I've written at the top of it, don't put the time that you get in. Like the point is that if there's a fire, we get you out.
Yeah.
Or not. No, we get you out. So I don't care what time you got in. I just need to know that you're in the building. Do you know what I mean? So it's those kind of things where it's about little things that are trying to
instill
to shift to a more sort of trusting, less clock watchy kind of culture.
That's open and transparent, right? I think that is kind of what it feels like you're describing.
Yeah. So it's little things like that.
And how do you get the fun in there, the silliness that's important to you?
I think you've just got to be yourself and like interested in other people. Other people bring the fun if you let them. And it's just people just come out with funny stuff, don't they?
Yes. Yeah. Well, if you and I'm interested because obviously you did that staff survey when you started. Is it something that you've revisited? Has there been another staff survey? What we can talk about all these things that you instill, but and someone who's data driven. No, tell me, has that changed within the organisation?
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? Everything's sort of work in progress. But we did redo the staff survey. I guess from some of the changes that we made, I spoke for a couple of minutes at NHS Charities Together conference a couple of weeks ago, and talked about some of the changes that we've talked about here as well, and the sort of priorities that we've developed around grant making and launching funding calls, and being much more proactive and strategic as a funder. So I've got some of that in front of me. So the impact of the changes are that. So we're more strategic funder, creating an evidence base for proactive funding, and the applications that we respond to are focused on the greatest impact for people in Sheffield.
Yeah.
We're bringing together the two beneficiary trusts to be able to plan multi-year and significant funding opportunities.
Yeah.
So rather than being reactive, saying, give us an application for something that you think might be good around dementia, we're bringing the two trusts together and going, what's a patient journey look like from diagnosis to end of life? Where's the best place to drop in charitable support? We're having better relationships with frontline NHS colleagues. So rather than scrabbling around for a case study, we're being introduced to people who are passionate patient advocates, which is very different and very brilliant. The president of the Chamber of Commerce recently described us as fast becoming a powerhouse charity in the city that's committed to transformational change. So that's pretty cool. And then the staff survey, which is what you actually asked me about.
Yes.
You're going to have such a job on editing this. The staff survey, the statement, the charity makes the best use of supporters' time and money, increased from 14%, which is appalling, to 80% agreeing with that statement.
Wow.
And so like I say, we've just done, if you pick up any management book, we've done the basics around it, but trying to build the niceness around it too.
Yeah.
The other bit was around, there's obviously a huge amount to pull out across that survey, but trusting the chief exec and the leadership team went from 23 to 80%.
Yeah.
And I can be my true self at work is at 100%.
Wow. Okay.
That's pretty cool.
That's very cool. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And testimony to change in a short space of time, but just, how you can instill that quite quickly into an organisation for individuals to. I mean, I know that takes time, and it will continue to develop, and it will, that survey hopefully will, look even better in a few years' time. But actually, there are quick wins to be had, and changes that can really instill that confidence in individuals.
Yeah, definitely. But I'd say there's always going to be somebody who's not massively happy.
Yeah.
With me, potentially. Yeah. And that's where it comes back to sort of holding your nerve and being like, I'm doing this for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Here's the rationale behind it.
Yeah.
Assume good intent of people.
Yeah.
All that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But, we reflect on the conversation and talking about your upbringing and about that. Was it belligerence? I think was maybe a word that you used.
Belligerence.
Yeah, not one that I've used, but there's something about resilience that is built from childhood and through your career in the sector and your experiences, and I guess a thick skin that I guess you have to have when you're a chief executive of an organisation and steering them on a path to where you see the future of the organisation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which doesn't always mean that you bring everybody with you, 100% of the time, does it? Which can be tough.
That's the thing. Obviously, studied stuff around change management, being part of change management processes, and all of that. And everybody who's ever disagreed with me or in a professional context, has been like, you need to bring people with you. And that is absolutely true. Again, read the management book, bring people with you.
Sure.
But actually, sometimes you just got to do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
First thing to say to end this podcast on. Can you go back to people feeling happy about being their true self?
I think that there's a reality that's really important, isn't there, for people to get. And I think sometimes to change organisations, to move them forward. Obviously, you talk about restructures and reorganisation, a new way of doing things. It doesn't always land with everybody 100% of the time, but you can see. I mean, you can see within the numbers of you've got some, really clear data to say, well, this organisation has moved on. You've got great quotes of what people are saying about, Sheffield Hospitals Charity being a powerhouse charity within the city, which is a phenomenal result and change, and just part of the journey, right? This is you're not at the destination yet, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. Keeping on the trajectory is the plan.
Yeah. Beth, it's been great to speak. We've heard so many inspiring things. I think, for me, some takeaways there around, important people in the sector that you can learn from and, soaking up from good people. I'm sure probably in the same instance, you learn things from people that maybe don't do things in exactly the right way as well. But being that sponge within the sector. And qualifications as well, and going away and getting that commitment to learning, but that hard work, determination, grit, taking the opportunities when they come up. Beth, if you reflected on today and what you've learned in your career to date, and you could speak to yourself in that, I don't know, in the equestrian centre in your late teenage years, and give yourself one piece of advice going into your career, what do you think it might be?
Well, you didn't give me a heads up about this question.
I didn't know.
I'd say make sure that you always get the questions from anybody who's hosting the podcast. What would I say to my teenage self?
Yeah.
It's too hard. I'd say take all the opportunities. Learn all you can. Life is short. Eat the cake.
Yeah. Great, Beth. That's brilliant. Thank you. No, all good. And Beth, look, really appreciate you coming on to the Charity Changemakers podcast today. Really inspiring story. It's great to see, the transformation and change that Sheffield Hospital Charities has been under in the last, under your leadership, and really excited to see next steps within that. For people that are listening, or if they've got questions or queries or things they want, are you happy that we sort of tag you on LinkedIn? People drop you a message if they wanted to get in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is the best place to get me, because Twitter's a bit of a cesspit now, isn't it? Can check out our website, just Google Sheffield Hospitals Charity, and happy to connect and chat with people. And thank you so much for inviting me on. It's really, really great.
Yeah, good.
And bizarre, actually, talking about all of that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. From equine to charity. It's honestly a sentence that I think when I typed it in an email to you, I was like, I've definitely never written that one before. But it's
you can see the state of my CV.
Yeah. But Beth, thank you again. It's been great to chat, and we look forward to catching up again soon.
And that's a wrap for this week on the Charity Changemakers podcast. Remember, you can be the change you want to see in the world. We hope that this episode has inspired you to get out there and make a difference. This podcast was brought to you by Charisma Charity Recruitment, one of the UK's leading recruitment consultancies for the charity sector. Whether you're a passionate professional seeking your next challenge, or a charity searching for a top-tier talent, Charisma Charity Recruitment can help. Visit their website at charismarecruitment.co.uk to explore their latest positions and to connect your organisation with the change makers shaping the future of the non-profit world. Thanks for joining us.